for this before they unmake what I was. Before they unmake what I was a thing that could be known. I was a thing that could be known, but only without love. But only without love was I a thing that could be known. Was I a thing that could be known? Before they unmake what I was. Before they unmake what I was made for this.
In this triangle of stars there will be pain and breathing. If there's fear in your heart, that's the first sign that you're not leaving. I'll sing out my defiance as I rend the cage of my spine. Set my feet upon a path that no map could define. I'll be faster than lightning, deadly as a kiss. When I chase you down, I will know utter bliss. I will flutter over water with my wings of last unfurled. Someday I'll be big enough to hold the world.
When I come back, there will be blood, and I will know the secret shapes of the elder constellations in the colors I've never seen. In the colors I've never seen will be the elder constellations that will reveal the secret shapes, and when I come back, there will be blood.
In this triangle of stars, a compass transcends the four directions. For a politics of fortune far much older than elections. Your ideals of hearth and home sweep before our revolution. As we finally become your problem with no solution, I'll be faster than lightning, deadly as a kiss. Your flesh will know the feeling of my metamorphosis. I will wither over water with my flag of silver. Someday I'll be big enough to hold the world.
I'll take everything I can and be more than you can bear, as the songs will grind you down for a burden made to kill. From this burden made to kill, as the songs will grind you down and be more than you can bear, I'll take everything I can
Hello everyone! I'd love to realise that my auto commands are out of date. I had everything else ready to go. I even made new BGM for this stream. You can hear it now. It's from the EP. Hey Joyces, thanks for coming by. And that was the one thing that I didn't update. Let's get that fixed. One second, let's try that again. There we go. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, we're fine. How is everybody doing? I am exhausted. I've had a day at the end of a week. So it's the first week back at teaching at work this week. And I, for various reasons, was super stressed about it. And it's gone fine. It's been great. I've had lovely teaching experiences. My students are great. The unfortunate result was that I got basically no sleep at all Sunday night, and I've been catching up all week, while also trying to finish dealing with the fallout from the industrial action over the summer that I was involved in, and get this EP ready for launch. I only finished the last bits of mixing for this EP on Wednesday. That's why pre-orders only went up 2 days before release. Is the BGM volume okay, by the way? Am I coming through clearly above it? I tried to make it, get it set at the right level, so that my voice was clear and stuff. But the BGM is kind of hot to be used as BGM, so let me know. Cool, good to know. Anyway, yeah, so Wednesday was a scramble because I was in work teaching. I can lower it a smidge, that's fair enough. Something like that. Yeah, in work teaching first thing in the morning, came home, mixed and mastered finished off the remixing and mastering on I Was Made for This, on the EP version of I Was Made for This, and slammed it all onto Bandcamp, and then had to get working on actual day job stuff for a bit, and I've been day job stuffing with varying degrees of success because the university's technologies are not under control or well organized, while also trying to make sure that I promote the EP enough that people know it's happening without either annoying people or tripping my fear that I was annoying. But you know what it's like when you try to promote a creative project. It's really difficult to promote it enough that everyone who might want to see it sees it, without just feeling like you're spamming people. And particularly today, I have posted so many promotional messages on so many different platforms, and I hate doing that. And I'm knackered, and I'm streaming late because ideally I would have streamed a bit earlier, but I was in a voice lesson, because the process of learning never stops. But I have stories to tell about this EP, these 5 songs, this 20 minutes of music, because I realised that they cover an enormous span of my life. For a long time I've thought that the oldest piece of music that I am willing to admit to having written is I Promise I'll Remember the Words This Time, from my EP from a couple of years ago, String Theories. Which I wrote that song in early 2007 on the bones of an earlier song from about 2004 that I'd forgotten. That song is literally about having forgotten the earlier song and not being able to remember it and everything that meant. But on this EP, on track 4, I Have No Idea, at the start of the second verse is the oldest lyric that you are ever likely to hear from me, except under duress. I have all my old lyrics from when going back to my early teens. Some of them are terrible. The only way they might ever get shared is 1, if the mice haven't eaten them out of my filing cabinet, and 2,
some sort of like challenge stream with a forfeit or punishment game where I decide that I'm going to be brave and share them. There is some merit in that. Like, I think that it's good for artists to share their old shitty work sometimes, their embarrassingly bad beginner work, because it's useful to people who are new to a thing to see people being bad at it and to know that you can go from being bad at it to being good at it. Haven't quite found the nerve to make good on that for myself yet. And song lyrics would probably be the last thing I'd be willing to share, but I have them all. But the line "Pride is destruction and I have come to destroy" in verse 2 of "I Have No Idea," I think I can remember exactly where I was when I wrote it, to a level of precision where I could go on Google Maps now and I'm pretty sure I could drop a map pin within 10 yards of the exact point I was sitting when I wrote that line. In about 2001 or maybe 2002. Because and when I realized that I was gonna it is a spot and a location that crystallizes so much purely by coincidence about my life and my background and who I am and how I ended up here and how I ended up writing these songs. I was in GCSE religious studies class, sat next to my best friend on the front row in that classroom, and my desk was the one which, as I sat at it, was at the right-hand end of the teacher's desk. So the front row of desks in that classroom abutted the teacher's desk. I sat on the right-hand side. And that already tells you a lot about me at that age, that I was the kind of person who sat at the front of the class. It was actually a small classroom, for reasons I'll get into in a second. And there were only 2 rows of seats, but I was sitting right up front. And I was sat next to my friend, and she was in the habit of writing things on the inside of her folders, her ring binders, right? Which lots of teenagers do this. I kind of think it's a universal. Did you folks write things on the inside of your ring binders or your notebooks in school? Slogans, song lyrics, doodles, that sort of thing. I feel like it became universal, but everybody comes to it from different, like, inspirations or sees someone else doing it first and has the idea or whatever. I got the idea to do this from this friend who I sat next to in a lot of classes. I'm trying to avoid naming her. I'm probably going to fail. I'm probably going to at least let slip her first name, for which I'm sorry. She's almost certainly not here. I'm still distantly in touch with her. But like, I haven't communicated at length any time. But some of these stories she might want not associated with her name, so I'm trying to be careful. And she was the cool friend in a lot of ways. Cool friend, auto caption it, not call friend. That sounds somewhat dubious. So this is the first person I knew who was drinking underage, smoking underage, doing drugs underage, going clubbing underage, having sex underage. She was the first person I knew who was queer. And she was the first person I knew who was into, like, independent music that you wouldn't hear on, like, top 40 radio or on the big commercial radio stations. And she was by that point she was quite active, going to, like, local scene gigs in Manchester, which, you know, Manchester is a city that's got a long history now of, like, having music scenes going back at least well into the 80s. And was a circuit destination for bands who were playing the circuit with a build up to like their major album releases or their breakout album releases. And my friend was not a musician herself, but ran a music blog that was big enough that she got offered tickets to gigs and stuff. She got invited to go along and cover them. But it would be fair to say, I think, that she was a troubled teen in the kind of capital T sense of that term. We're talking a period where the NHS in particular in the UK was quite rapidly expanding the prescription of antidepressants. And the thing about the NHS is great, and it has real advantages like economies of scale, bargaining power, that stuff. And if our present government isn't making good use of that, that's not the problem of the NHS, that's the problem of the present government. But the problem of having a national health service is that it has to standardise. Hydration check. It has to have a standard way of doing things that is kind of nationally organised. And that means it doesn't have a lot of flexibility for things like individual patient fine-tuning and follow-up, which are really, really important with any kind of important with any kind of medication, really important with antidepressants, especially at that period where there were lots of relatively new antidepressants that had lots of side effects and stuff. For a long time, because of what happened to this friend, I was very anti-antidepressant, which I guess negatives cancel out. Double negatives cancel out. But and I want to be careful to distance my position from that, because obviously I know lots of people who antidepressants make their lives immeasurably better. I certainly saw this friend suffering from a lack of follow-up on these prescriptions that she had, in a bunch of ways. And that was kind of, by this point, the situation that friend was in. So what she was doodling on the inside of her folder were pretty angsty things, one way and another. It was like Manic Street Preachers lyrics. One thing I remember that I saw on the inside of her folder one day was the Philip Larkin poem, This Be the Verse, the first stanza of that. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. Which, aside that will be relevant later, when I became an adult and I started to be able to talk to my parents as an adult and point out some things that maybe they could have done better when they were raising me, or things that misfired about how they raised me. My mother used to quote that poem to me in self-defense. I'd be like, yeah, this wasn't great about how you raised me. I didn't appreciate this. And mum would go, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. Which is a bit of a cop-out, although I do understand that a lot of the ways that my mother caused harm to me are her doing exactly the things that her mother did to her, and they were just as bad then. More on that when I talk about the song on this EP that is specifically about my mother. But I did not. I was a nerd, right? I'm a child who sits in the front row of religious studies class. So I did not have the cultural reference points to know that these were coming from other sources, that she was quoting things. I thought she was making them up. And the actual origin point of this line, prior to description, I've come to destroy, I was just imitating. I thought, she was making up cool sounding poetry lines. I would make up some cool sounding poetry lines and put them inside of my folder, and that was one that I came up with. And it just stuck with me, and when I was pulling together the fragments of lyrics that became I Have No Idea, that one came with. But I have to say other things about this school and this class, I think. Because it's not just that I was there with this friend and this friend meant all these things to me and expanded my world in so many ways. That she absolutely did, and I owe her a huge amount. She introduced me to a whole bunch of bands that went on to shape my musical taste and my perception of what was cool in music. Some big bands, I mentioned Manic Street Preachers, Depeche Mode. She might have been the person who introduced me to Muse. But also like lots of smaller bands like Space and King Adora and Easy World. Some songs from whom stick with me. But this was a religious studies class, and I was 14-ish. So this was GCSE, which in the UK, GCSE is the exam bracket that you do from 14 to 16. And I know it was the first year of that, and so I was 14 because my birthday's towards the end of the year. Because this friend, among other things, we hit the start of second year of that. She turned 16 because her birthday was at the start of the year. She turned 16 and immediately ran away from home, and dropped out of that school and bounced around the country. And I didn't see much of her in person after that. Stayed in touch for a while. She did not see eye to eye with her mother. That also could be a segue. But we were at rich kids school. I've said before I went to a posh school. To give you some idea of how posh. So we had compulsory Latin classes for 2 years. It was that kind of school. It was proud to be a school that is I guess it must be like 550 years old now. Nearly 550 years old. And so it predates the modern era, predates the Age of Empire, really. Started, of course, as a clerical institution, because a school started that far ago, was definitely going to be educating people to the church. And indeed, one part of the school's grounds had been a convent. We had a building that was the convent building. It was an ex-convent. To the extent that like it still had the stained glass in the room that had been the chapel, which was by that point an English classroom. Studying Shakespeare in a room that had been a late medieval chapel was an interesting experience. So there was a deep Christian spine to this institution, but it was officially a secular school. Like, the UK has an official classification system for whether a school is a religious school or not. It was officially a secular school. That manifested in weird ways. So, on the one hand, if you were explicitly not a Christian, if you were Jewish or Muslim, you got to go to the Jewish or the Muslim assemblies rather than the general school assemblies. But if you were atheistic or agnostic or generally not Christian, you still had to go to a school assembly, which was the big kind of collective one. And there were Christian chaplains in those at least once a week. We sung Christian hymns. We had to go to the Founders Day church service where we sung a psalm in Latin in the local church as part of honouring the founder of the school and stuff. And lots of the senior staff at the school were Christian and talked a lot about their Christianity. So it was secular, sort of, but also sort of not. But one of the consequences of it being a officially secular school was they couldn't make optional religious studies classes compulsory. So when you get to GCSE at age 14, that's when you start to be able to choose different subjects. And so they could only offer religious studies as an option. And actually, we had a great teacher. We had a really good teacher for that module. Only about 8 people chose it. The way it worked was that religious studies was in the general group of subjects that you could choose, and you had to choose 4 or 5 of them. I didn't want to do geography or history or an extra foreign language, so I basically ended up with religious studies as a fallback. and it was in some ways it was the least kind of Christian-centric form of religious education I had at any point during my, normally religious studies classes up to that point had been like, this is what Christianity's about. Have you considered Christianity? Here's some Christian thoughts. We did talk about Christianity, but it was comparative. We did Christianity and Islam, and obviously, like, this is happening in the very early part of this century. I think we would have started the course. I would have started the course the year after 9/11. So suddenly, like, learning about Islam was very, very culturally live. And our teacher did a great job, because she was not a Christian, of explaining the connections and the similarities between Christianity and Islam, and like pushing back on some of the more xenophobic narratives around Islam. And that, up to that point, I and everybody else who knew me assumed that I was going to go into the sciences, right? I was taking every science class that I could. And I loved science, was fascinated by science, but my GCSE science classes had a problem. And the problem was that if you wanted to go into medicine or veterinary practice, if like that was your career goal, as it is for many, many people, understandably, for lots of good reasons, you had to do all the sciences. You couldn't skip any science classes. So the science classes were full of people who didn't like science and were intimidated by it, but wanted to be vets or doctors. And the teaching focused on them because that was who they had to reach. And the few of us who were there because we were science nerds had a very frustrating time of it, because we wanted more, basically. And it killed science for me. It just really made me miserable in those classes, to be sitting there doing these worksheets that were intended for people who hated science and didn't do anything to nurture like my interest. Meanwhile, I really liked the religious studies class, and it fascinated me. And when it came to age 16 to make the bigger decisions that were going to shape what university courses I could apply to and stuff, I wanted to do more religious studies, and I picked religious studies, and to fill out my choices I picked philosophy to go with the religious studies. And the rest, as they say, is history, because I am still doing philosophy. So that teacher in that class had a very profound redirecting effect on my life. It's not all negative. I know I talk shit about my degree and my discipline a lot these days, but oh god, there is a lot of value in it. I've gained so much from studying this subject. It's just that I have also been driven up several walls very high. And yeah, somehow the carryover from that is this one line in this song that didn't, like, I wrote it feeling like it was, in the way that teenagers do when they write song lyrics that they think are cool. It's like, oh, this sounds kind of edgy and dark and sinister in a way. It absolutely does, and it fits in that song. But when I wrote it, I didn't know what it meant. When I put it in the song, I didn't really know what it meant. It's taken until years later to kind of have my own grasp of what that song is about. And it has ended up in a bunch of ways maybe the most honest song I've ever written. And I think that shows in how I sang it. Like I said when we were doing the listening party earlier, I joked that this is the scream of my soul. But it kind of is. Like, you'll never convince me that I have enough to give is exactly how I feel about my creative efforts. I will always need more validation and more support in those. I'm very grateful to everybody who supported me today, who supported me in making the EP. Special thanks to Joyce's for so much help with like getting it to sound good, and for Lexi and Momo for putting up with me long enough. and contributing lyrics, which we'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted to note all that stuff about having gone to rich kid school, to place myself in the class system, to locate myself in the class system, because it's relevant for other parts of the story here. I went to rich kid school. I was not really a rich kid. Like, if I had gone to a non-rich kid school, my family would have been at the wealthier end of the school, but most of the kids I was at school with, their families were like big house, multiple cars, multiple foreign holidays every year, going to Europe, going to other parts of the world every year. My family was like medium-sized house, one car, maybe a foreign holiday every other year. Like, we definitely didn't go abroad every year. And it was a big deal if we could do that. And then, like, that places me at the poorer end of the people who were paying full fees for the school, but in a desperate attempt to pretend that private schools aren't pure class privilege, the school offered a number of bursaries to scholarships to pupils who were from poorer backgrounds. And the scholarship kids were always the nicest kids, right? And I don't really remember anybody bullying them for being scholarship kids, because everybody kind of distantly liked them, didn't feel threatened by them, I guess. Whereas the rich kids were awful. Rich kids are awful. I was awful, and I was relatively non-awful relative to lots of the kids who were at that school. And like, I got stabbed in class at that school once. That's how bad rich kids are. Private school is an abomination. Abolish them all. But that's where I was coming from. My parents were liberal-leaning, property-owning, petit bourgeois kind of people. Excuse me a moment. And oh, what's up? Stabbed. Yeah, I got stabbed. I must have told you the stabbing. I must have told you the stabbing story at some point. I don't even really want to dwell on that story, because in a way it's not representative. It was a weird incident. There was a contretemps in class. We had normally, so it was a double class, and that term we had a substitute teacher. You have definitely heard this story before, love. We had a trainee teacher for half of the double class. And so our regular teacher would take one half, and then the trainee teacher would show up and take over, except that one day our regular teacher was off. They maybe like on a training day or something. So we had a substitute teacher for the first half and a trainee teacher for the second. And the substitute teacher left early because they had to go and like teach their next class. It was another teacher from the school, and they were covering. And there was this like 5-minute gap, and I have, even having seen lots of occasions where the teacher leaves the room for a few minutes and all hell breaks loose, I've never seen all hell break loose in a class so quickly as happened in that gap. Like, a fight broke out behind me, and fallout from that in a kind of long domino run resulted in me pissing off another lad in the class who grabbed an item off the desk nearest him and lunged at me across a table, and it so happened that the item he grabbed was a pair of scissors. And he insisted afterwards that he hadn't realised it was a pair of scissors, but very clearly I remember him opening the pair of scissors before lunging at me, so on some level he must have been aware that it was scissors. And I will be happy to show you the scar if you want, babe, when I see you. It's not a very big scar. I was very, very lucky. I was not seriously injured. And although I'm still a bit nervous when people are using scissors behind me these days. But Yeah, that's Rich Kids for you. The year after I left, a couple of people in my cohort were sent down for armed robbery because they'd been robbing old ladies for drug money, because so much drug use. Like, I know there's a lot of, like, I know there's a lot of drug use among high school students generally, but rich kids can afford more drugs because they're rich. And that can lead to situations that get out of control and people getting sent down for armed robbery. Rich kids are terrible. Wealth is terrible. It does terrible things to you. And I just want to say, I may never have been that bad, but I sure was an insufferable little shit. Like, in a lot of ways. No one comes out of this situation looking good. Which I suppose is as good a way to pivot to the next two songs I want to talk about. Which is the opening two songs of the EP, Burning and Another Love Your Child. Again, like, these songs have a long history. I wrote them both in about 2008-9. So at this point I was at university. I was a student. I joined a band. I was delighted recently to discover that I do actually have the one good quality recording that I made with that band. We made an EP in 2010. And I thought I'd lost my copy of it, but I actually still have it. It's the only good quality recordings of me playing drums. I was the drummer in that band. That explains a lot about how this record sounds, because I care a lot about drum sounds. And if you listen to the record, you will hear the drums in a way that you don't normally hear drums on rock records. Yeah, this is like all the negative stereotypes that exist about, like, poor kids. Far truer of rich kids. Like, poor kids, if they're in gangs, it's because they're trying to survive, right? Rich kids get into that stuff for fun and pleasure and sometimes profit, and it's terrible. You know. Rich kids, it's fucking terrible. That was in the convent building that I mentioned, by the way. Not in the chapel room. That would have been properly dramatic if it had been the chapel room with the stained glass light and everything. It would have been great. We were in one of the old, what would have been a dorm room, basically, up in the top floor. Deeply unromantic room to get stabbed in. Which is a hell of a thing to say. I still to this day feel terrible for the student teacher, because, like, the stabbing happened and that was kind of that, you know, that's the moment where everybody realizes things have gone too far, right? And it started to settle back down again. And the thing about stab wounds is that they don't necessarily Lexi, do not fucking plot romantically stabbing me, okay? You have to prepare very carefully for that. Other kinds of impaling, on the other hand, no, I'm not allowed to say that on Twitch. Where was I? Yeah. Like, the thing about a puncture type stab wound, a deep stab wound like that, it takes a while to start bleeding. So there was a kind of hanging moment before we realized how serious it was. And then I, like, oh shit, I'm bleeding. I need to go to the nurse's office and get patched up. I run to the door of the classroom, open it, and the student teacher is standing on the other side. And, you know, I would say, like, that person just stabbed me. I'm going to the nurse's office. This poor student teacher was just left alone to deal with that situation. I don't know how she handled it, poor woman. Yeah, it just... A trial by fire I was able to direct a senior member. I on my way to the nurse's office, which was like 300 or 400 yards away. It was a long journey. I passed a senior teacher that I knew, like one of the deputy heads, and was able to direct him to go and support her, which probably helped a lot. Oh god, it was a wild fucking day. It was probably the only time that I was like properly the talk of the school. You know, the following day, loads of people coming out. Did he really stab you? Fucking yes, he did. Anyway, I was trying to talk about like things that happened years later. I realised the stabbing story is like spectacular and fantastic, and it's a fun one to dine out on. But weirdly, I haven't written much in the way of songs about getting stabbed. Have I? I do have a song on the back burner called Knives, I suppose, which might see the light of day in the coming year. I need to rewrite some of the lyrics, though, because the lyrics are stupid. That's a segue, because Burning and Mother Love Your Child are both songs which I have rewritten the lyrics for since I originally wrote them, because the original lyrics were, if not stupid, then at least naive. So, in 2008, maybe I have to start earlier. I have to go back and explain, like, my perception of America over the years. So I grew up in the 90s, was first aware of America as, like, Bill Clinton's America. I had a very optimistic and positive view of America. Like, as far as I knew, when I'm thinking back to like primary school, early primary school. My image of America was basically California. It's like they make movies and video games there. It's sunny all the time, and everybody's rich. Which obviously has never been true of California, but it's the public image of California. And like, it was still pretty rare for anyone to go to America on holiday. It was so rare that I think when I was about 6, 5 even, a classmate of mine at school, his family had a holiday in America over the summer, and they came back, and our class teacher made time for like them to tell us about their trip to America and for us to ask questions about what it was like there and stuff. And I had the distinct impression, like I really kind of thought of America as like, if you get successful in life, the reward for that is you get to move to America where it's sunny all the time and everybody's rich and they make movies and video games. And then, you know, the century rolls over and Bush replaces Clinton. And through my teens, between like Bush being Bush and the war in Iraq, very different image of America emerges, right, in the UK. And it becomes very fashionable and very cool to be very scornful about America. There probably always was an element of that. You know, I don't know how British comedy could have come through the Reagan years without all sorts of taking the piss. But it has nothing on the scale of the vitriol and scorn that was coming out of British comedy directed at America in that period. Partly as a way of deflecting from the fact that our government was also corrupt as shit and evil. And I fully bought into it. I'm not saying I was above it. Like, in retrospect, it was obviously bad, but at the time I was fully on board. There was a joke that did the rounds regularly that we were going to rescind the Declaration of Independence on the grounds that America had proved incapable of governing itself. Like that joke circulated every year on like email forwards and stuff, early social media and so on. Yeah, I found it as funny as everybody else in Britain did. It was a way of making ourselves feel that our country was better, which is the number one thing that Britain loves doing. It's like, number 2 is making us feel that Britain sucks. Number 1 is making us feel that it's still better than the alternatives. And then and I think again this was 2008. It wasn't the first time that I'd seen this guy, but I went with my parents to see Tom Paxton play. who is a American singer-songwriter from the 60s, kind of folk singer-songwriter boom in New York, and who is probably the author of the first song I ever heard. My dad used to sing Paxton's "The Last Thing on My Mind" constantly when I was a child, and I can certainly remember it being one of the first. It's one of the first songs I can ever remember having like stuck on my brain, and I can still sing it off the top of my head. I'm not going to try now because my voice is shot, and also it's the middle of the night. Yeah, I remember that song very, very well. We know that infants develop the ability to hear, to recognize and process sound before birth, while still in the womb, in the last stages of pregnancy. It is very possible, and it kind of feels like I heard that song before I was born. It's so deeply ingrained in my sense of like what music is. It's quite a sad song. The other songs, like there are kind of three songs that I have that feeling about. There's Fire and Rain by James Taylor, which is even more an incredibly sad song. And there's a song that my dad wrote called Blame the Singer, which, if you go to my Bandcamp and you look at the single release of I Was Made for This, the B-side of that is called The Singer Wrote the Song. That song is directly about my dad's song and my relationship with my father. Anyway, I went to see Tom Paxton, who is Tom Paxton, not Tom Pakistan. Thank you, auto caption. I can see the auto captioner popping up in front of me, and it's making some interesting mistakes. And huge influence on me musically is Paxton. Wonderful performer, very diligent about kind of the stories behind his songs. Will tell you the stories behind his songs. Will give you the historical context. Will tell you about his colleagues, his professional colleagues, who are people like that. That's a group that includes Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, and also people like Phil Oakes and Dave Van Ronk and Pete Seeger and the Clancy Brothers. This whole kind of New York folk scene from the 60s, full of wonderful, wonderful musicians from all over the place. Mississippi John Hurt. He was my introduction to Mississippi John Hurt, who probably accounts for that. There are specific things about my musical style that are directly just me doing Mississippi John Hurt stuff. Huge influence on me. Very politically conscious guy. Not what I would call anymore a... One second. I love me some Mississippi John Hurt. Mississippi John Hurt is a... if you just look at an album cover of his, you'd think, oh yeah, classic American 20s bluesman, but actually stylistically more a ragtime performer than blues, which is where the connection is. And if you listen to the rhythms on my recordings, there's a hefty ragtime influence there. That works one half through Scott Joplin. I play a lot of Scott Joplin piano, and one half through Mississippi John Hurt. By the way, if you want to get a sense of what Mississippi John Hurt is about, on YouTube, I think it's still up there, someone's uploaded most of the archive of Pete Seeger's 60s TV show Rainbow Quest, which was Seeger hosting it was a half-hour show, and he'd have a couple of up-and-coming musicians or music groups or something like that on the show each week to kind of play with and talk to about music. And I think on the first episode, he had Mississippi John Hurt on, and I treasure that recording so much. I'm not sure whether I've listened to Necco Case. I might have listened to a song here or there. I definitely know the name. But by all means, like, tell me more, or like pop a recommendation in Discord or something. Anyway, like, Paxton's politics, liberal, left of centre, kind of Democrat voting kind of guy. Definitely had been more radical in the past if he's hanging out with people like Phil Oakes and Dave Van Ronk, who were revolutionary communists. But you know, certainly I had enormous respect for him then, still do to this day. And I came back from that concert, like, conflicted, because I had, on the one hand, I had all these jokes and this image of America as, like, Bush's America, right? The Bush that would later notoriously be... the America that would later notoriously be labelled as Real America by Sarah Palin to great and very justified scorn and anger. And on the other hand, here was Tom Paxton, wonderful, wise, funny, gifted performer, musician that I looked up to immensely. And I wrote a song about that tension, about, like, my changing perception of America over the years, and like, the need to recognize that lots of American people are not America's parliamentary politics, America's electoral politics, which, you know, America's electoral politics are fucked up. I don't know if you've noticed. Dave Van Ronk was a real one, definitely. So I wrote a song, like I say, about this tension, and I think it's a worthy sentiment. You know, I was in my early 20s. The Obama election campaign and all that bullshit was hotting up. In fact, I think maybe by the time I actually wrote the song, Obama was in, and the fight over the ACA was happening, and the Tea Party was happening within the Republican Party, and really, like, it was becoming very obvious that both of these Americas were real, and that America was not easily reduced, because of course it wasn't, to one simple image of, like, either it's the future or it's a terrible place. It's very difficult to write about that without kind of overdoing it and going too far and being like, yeah, like, I believe, I have faith in the American dream or the American project or whatever. And eventually, I wrote that song. I played it at solo gigs a bunch, the arrangement, the musical arrangement that is on this EP was basically written in about 2012. Now, originally I wrote the song for my band. The band didn't want it because they really, you know. When I first got into the band, I was quite heavily involved in the songwriting because I was the one with the most confidence in songwriting, and I was probably the worst songwriter in the band, but I was the most confident songwriter in the band because I was raised to be confident, because I went to a posh school that teaches people to be confident and to think that they'll inherit the earth, and I still struggle with that. Like, I'd been heavily involved in songwriting at first. As the group matured and as we, like, got the right pieces in place, it became clear that the kinds of songs I wanted to write, my bandmates saw as cringe, basically. This was the high era of like cringing at things being grounds for social scorn and hostility, and like I was into like big stadium rock sounds and pop music and stuff that like feels good to dance to, which was regarded as cheesy and passé by my bandmates, who were into increasingly kind of proggy, post-rock, weird noises, like odd time stuff, lots and lots of guitar effects. And yeah, they went on to make a very cool record of those sounds after I left the band, but eventually, like, it got to the point where I was writing all these songs and the band didn't want them, and they were starting to play stuff that was too complicated for me to keep up with. You know, like, it's all well and good having the ambition to write songs in complicated time signatures. You know, a bassist would turn up and it's like, yeah, this riff is like a bar of 7, a bar of 9, a bar of 8, a bar of 9, a bar of 7, a bar of 9, a bar of 6, and then it resolves. And I'm like, buddy, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? Eventually it got to the point where I just couldn't play well enough to keep up. And I didn't want to, because I didn't want to do anything that complicated sounding. And we parted ways, and I started working kind of on my own, doing like solo guitarist, singer stuff. And I played the old version of that song, Or Pain Burning, a bunch of times live. And it's probably my best live song. It's very playable live, and if I play it live, you get something very like the effect of the full band arrangement that's on the EP, which is why it's also on the acoustic EP, String Theories, from a couple of years ago. But eventually, I just my political perspective shifted. I mean, that perspective of like, even thinking of the question in terms of America, right? Is America good or bad? I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake that we're encouraged to make, because it serves the interests of nationalist capitalism. But even thinking about it in terms of nation states is granting too much ground. And I got to the point a couple of years ago where I didn't want to sing it anymore. I wanted to play the song because I'm proud of the song and I really enjoy playing it. It's a fun one to play, but I didn't want to sing it because I didn't like the lyrics. So I rewrote the lyrics, and it became a song about England, basically. It's a song about this country, about its politics, and about this thing that happens in our politics where we're expected to regard nation states as like families and families as like nation states. You know, you have a head of state, you have a head of the household. That's supposed to be a similar role, or there's supposed to be a structural mapping there between the two. So that's why there's stuff in there about like, linking specifically political situations to the fatherhood relationship and like, maybe the idea of fatherland, because that's how they get you, right? Maybe the most famous example of this is when conservative politicians talk about like balancing the national budget, and they want you to think about balancing the national budget the same way as balancing a household budget, even though national budgets are a complete fantasy in terms of real material effects. The numbers don't really bear a clear relationship to the material reality in the way that money in your bank when you're a family corresponds to how many weeks can you afford to eat or pay rent or whatever. And like that song translated very well from being a song about complicated feelings about America to being a song of negative feelings about the UK. I don't know quite what that sounds. Mother Love Your Child underwent a very similar journey, because, like I say, around that time in about 2008, 9, 10-ish, I was into the idea of political songwriting. I wanted our songs to be political. I wanted to write songs that were politically expressive. And I was sort of looking around for subjects to write songs about, and I had this guitar riff. The other thing that's happening at that time is I'm starting to write songs in that style. I hadn't written songs in that style before. And, you know, I'm plural. Brill and Becky is two different of me. Up until that point, most of my songwriting has been Becky songwriting. This, in about that period, is the emergence of Brill songwriting, which is simpler and more rhythmic and more kind of... It's more about cool guitar chord shapes that you can play and they feel good to dance to, and then we put some melody on top of that. But the guitar riff from Mother Love Your Child was one of those riffs, one of those early Brill riffs. And I had a bunch of different ideas for what to do with it, and it ended up originally being a song about abortion. Not an anti-abortion song, but a song about, like, thinking of abortion as not the heart of the problem. Like saying, you know, what's really a problem is the idea of an unwanted pregnancy, and why aren't we working to, you know, make it so that no woman ever doesn't want her pregnancy, which is like the thing about America is a naive outlook. You know, the heart is in the right place, but the reality of it is that it's more important than that, and like choice and autonomy do need to be at the center of that debate. And again, I had this song, I played it a bunch. I eventually got dissatisfied with the politics of it, and I rewrote it. And this was right kind of 2020 to 21 when I rewrote it. And I was really starting to come to grips at that time with the fact that my relationship with my mother has completely broken down since I transitioned. Hi Bird, thank you for coming by. Thank you so much for being here. You know, my parents, when they raised me, emphasized kind of rationalism and science and knowledge and tolerance and all that stuff in that very kind of liberal, centrist, technocrat, Guardian reader sort of way. And when I came out to them and transitioned, thank you, Bird. Like I say, I'm sure I've told that story on stream before. I know I've told it in all sorts of contexts. But yeah, when I transitioned, it immediately became clear that my parents' image of themselves as tolerant was an image, right? And a lot of their sense of themselves and the way they identified themselves was built on kind of their ability to project an image that was never challenged, right? They were never really challenged to genuinely be progressive. All they had to do was, you know, make some regular charitable contributions and not be completely vicious to rough sleepers and support the arts and that sort of thing. And then here was a person in their family asking them to conduct themselves differently, to learn new habits of like what they called me and how they addressed me and stuff, and asking them to put up with me looking weird while I figured out how to present femme and stuff. And my mother could not stand this, and still can't. Like, really has been very, very hostile. Decided out of the blue that she hated my choice of name. She, like, claimed that she had always hated the name that I chose before I chose it, even though I have a cousin with the same name, even though she had more or less adopted in Manchester there's a fairly prestigious college of music that my parents patronise, and every year or so they adopt a student from the college to kind of take a special interest in their career. And they had one such student that year who has the same name as me, and it was never a problem. As soon as I wanted them to call me that, mother telling me to my face that she hated the choice of name. And our relationship has never really recovered, and that's why there's a song on this. And actually, if you go back to the very first Brill and Becky release, to I, that's the first song on there, in an acoustic version again. It's not a very, like, it's pretty unpolished, that recording, because I was relatively inexperienced at home mixing and stuff. But that song transformed when I realised that I could just make it about my mother, and I could put some of my feelings about her into it. And that really is kind of the oh, fuck God, yeah, exactly, like that too. Like, yeah, your mother and your relationship to your mother also shaped my anger at the idea of motherhood, and at the way we organise families. And like, since then I have become a the technical term is a family abolitionist, which doesn't mean like do away with everything that looks even vaguely like a family tie, right? What it means, at least to me, is what we have been taught that the word family means, kind of in a global prevailing mass culture sense, is kind of the Victorian middle class idea of a family, which is fundamentally a property structure, right? There's a master of the household, and he owns a family which is expected to perform certain services for him in terms of maintaining his estate and propagating his property to the next generation. Yeah, like, so many parents of trans people, when the trans people come out and want to change their names, this becomes a huge thing, because on some level they've been taught to regard their children as property, and property doesn't rename itself, right? And like, yeah, my mum had this thing with my choice of name. She also, like, when I came out, she wrote me a very long email in which she suggested that maybe I didn't need to actually transition, I could just have like a female alter ego. The subtext of which was, please don't ask me to put up with this. You can ask your like bohemian friend, your weird bohemian friends to change, but don't ask me to change. And she still, like, struggles to look me in the eye, struggles to address me directly by name. I came out on December 1st, and I was visiting. I already arranged to go and stay with them, as one normally does, go and visit one's family for Christmas. And the degree to which she wouldn't look at me when I was at home. Originally, I'd planned to go for 2 weeks. I was there 2 days, and I almost came home. And actually, I have to shout out another massive musical influence of mine, my very good friend Sam Jones. samjonesmusic.bandcamp.com if you want to check out his stuff. kind of saved my family, or saved my ability to relate to my family, because I was sort of half planning what I would need to do to just pack up and leave. This is like the last day that traveling would have been possible before Christmas Day. If I didn't leave that day, I would have had to have waited through Christmas. But I went out for a walk to clear my head first, and I listened to his album, Beautiful Reflections, and it kind of persuaded me to stick it out at least for Christmas. And so I stayed, in the end, I think I stayed 6 days. Of the 2 weeks I'd been planning to stay. And even that was a trial, and I part of me is still in that house in those few days, putting up with the microaggressions and the pure aggression, because of course, like, this is Britishness, right? There was no screaming, there was no expression of anger, there was just tension. There was just passive aggression. And if you read my novels, like, you can find endless explorations of this, because that's how British people relate to one another, like how British middle class people relate to one another. You can't ever rock the boat. And if you do rock the boat, you are in the wrong regardless of why you are rocking the boat. And that is why the British middle class have come together so vehemently against everything even faintly progressive over the last 5 to 10 years. The whole kind of anti-trans knee-jerk, the anti kind of climate change action knee-jerk, the anti-woke knee-jerk, all of that stuff is just, you can't rock the boat. If you rock the boat, you're wrong, regardless of what your complaint is. I can't talk to my mother anymore, but at least I got a cool song out of it. And that is Rechilding, right? Like, this EP is about the way that family structures model nation-state structures, so that the family is preparation for being a citizen. What in Marxist theory is called reproduction, right? It's the reproduction of capitalism generation to generation. And the title, Rechilding, obviously is a play on rewilding, the process of taking cultivated or domesticated lands and returning them to the wilderness. And like building an analogy between that and like this idea of a trans second childhood or a rebirth or metamorphosis, which is the theme of I Was Made for This. I Was Made for This is the song I wrote about surgery last year, going through GRS and all the stress of preparing for that and all the fallout from it as well. Like, it's been a wonderful change in my life in a lot of ways, and I don't think most of the things I've accomplished in the year since I would have been able, year and a half since, I would have been able to accomplish had I not had that. It's freed me so much. One final cluster of stories about my mother, though, because she's in this story too. When I got out of hospital after surgery, I stayed with my parents for a couple of weeks. Just the recommendation is, stay with friends or stay with someone who can take care of you, because you are going to be weak, you're going to be in pain, you're going to be dilating 3 times a day, which is a huge chore. It's like 4 hours of effort to kind of do all the dilation and the cleaning up afterwards. Stay with someone who can cook your meals for you. So my parents picked me up from the hospital, drove me home. It was a long drive. It was like 6 hours of travel time. We get home, and I don't think we've been home. And I say home, I mean their house, which has not actually ever really been my home. I've never lived there. I've only ever stayed there for a few weeks at a time. And I will probably never stay there for as long as a week ever again after my last experience. But we'd been there like 2 hours when my mother started lecturing me on how I wasn't dressing femme enough to pass as a woman. I was like, I literally just got out of hospital after major surgery. I'm dressing for comfort. I am not dressing to look as femme as possible because I shouldn't have to worry about any of the dangers that attend on that in my parents' house. If there's a danger here, it is coming from you, mother. And she did the same thing a couple of days later. She was like, well, if you dress like that in public, then people might get confused about your gender and beat you up. And I said, look, if they do that, that's their problem. People shouldn't do that. People shouldn't beat you up because they get confused about your gender. And my mother said, and I quote, that was a very male attitude of me to take. Which, one, it's not. It's basic feminism that you shouldn't be able to get beaten up for dressing the way you want to dress. Two, the fucking arrogance, the fucking nerve of saying that to me. I will never, ever be at peace with that. And I don't think there's any way that I could... And she doesn't even realize what's wrong with that, right? This is not a woman who is even capable of understanding that she might be in the wrong on something like this. And that's how it works. That's how England works. That's how hegemonic cis-heteropatriarchal culture works. It creates people who are unable to recognize that their own self-image is at odds with how other people experience it, who can only experience disruption of their self-image by how other people feel about it as a direct personal threat. And you know, it was supposed to make me into that. It did make me into that for years. I'm not innocent of any of this. I have been very, very lucky in my life to know people, to have known people, to have stumbled into the orbit of people who presented me with enough sustained challenge to that I was able to come to a different understanding, and to see some of the connecting tissue of like, oh, this mindset is installed to turn us into dutiful servants of empire, to prepare us effectively for bureaucratic roles in the governance of the English state. And this hovers in the back of my mind in everything I do, that I was trained for that. I was raised to be that. And it's on me to find other ways of being. And that's why I am now a gay bug on the internet. Like, all the stuff from my debut a few months ago about like re-embracing nature and sinking back into nature and becoming humble before nature is my kind of, I don't want to say it's my ideological alternative to that, because I don't think it's an escape, but it's my strategy for shaking up how I think about these things. And that is the metamorphosis that is the subject of the song I Was Made for This. It is at least the answer that I have to the kind of statement of my own anguish. And I have no idea, because this produces a very deep hollowness in people, right? If your only source of value ultimately is what can you do to serve the British Empire, and how can you score points within the capitalist hierarchy of that system, that's very much at odds with like making art. And a lot of the art that was made to support the English capitalist system, and there's a lot of it, right? You know, Alfred Lord Tennyson is a huge, famous, respected poet who is his entire oeuvre is Rule Britannia. Like, you can't live that way. You can only serve that way. And this is how I get free, I hope, or if not get free, then at least get to a position where I can see freedom, where I can learn to think differently, and that's what this EP is about, all told. And like, an important part of that is being gay, frankly, or not being ideologically straight, let's say, not being invested in the normativity of heterosexual relationships. You can be in a heterosexual relationship, that's fine. You just can't act as if heterosexual relationships are the sole correct form of relationship. And that is why The Long Star, which is just straight up a love song I wrote to my girlfriends using words that they wrote to each other, is on this album, and it's not out of place, right? In this album about like rejecting traditional and dominant modes of family and relationship. I think it's worth it to have the alternative listed as well. The alternative, like, demonstrated. And there's stuff in that song about what this has done to us, right? Like, because none of us have grown up in happy families, actually. My family looks idyllic from the outside, in the sense that my parents had a stable marriage and stable economic circumstances, and were property owning and all that stuff. Wife, 2 kids, house, car, garden, etc. Really fit that image of like what a family is supposed to be. But sometimes the best proof that a system is wrong is when you see it do exactly what it's supposed to, and you realize that what it's supposed to do is not what you were promised that it does. And that's my family. Like, they did everything that is supposed to produce the results of a good family, and now I am a trans bug on the internet, which is just a real life version of all those. My son is fine. Mom, your daughter is, embarrassing trans stereotype kind of come to life. Because there's a grain of truth in all those jokes, let's be real. It's a good joke format, if I'm honest. I think it could be overplayed, but I think it's a good joke format. Your daughter's favourite trope is fan family, yeah. Yeah. Noticeably, like, very few of my characters in any of my stories interact with their parents in any way, like, ever. I just don't want to deal with that shit anymore, frankly. I call my dad once a fortnight, and that's enough. My dad's a musician. Like I said earlier, a lot of my interest in music is because my dad was interested in music. A lot of the music I'm interested in is stuff I first heard my dad play. I do not send him my music. I don't say like, "Hey Dad, I released a record. Do you want to listen to it?" Because he doesn't know how to be supportive. He doesn't know how to take an interest. And these days I'm writing songs that would upset him, so I'm not going to bother. I just minimize dealing with him as much as possible. And even more so with my mother. Which leaves me more time to be gay on the internet and contemplate fleeing the country because, oh my god, shit's getting bad over here. I could tell more stories. I've got more stories. Like, part of my training, right, as a philosopher, is to be able to move between scales, to start from like a small thing and work out to a big picture, or vice versa. And I could tell my entire life story in this 20 minutes of music. That would leave me without stories to tell for the things I'm going to release next. So the next big project for the thing I want to do next year is there's an album that I've been working on since at least 2011. It's a collection of songs that were not written as like a concept album, but were all come from the same kind of emotional place and context, and have some similarities that I realized after the fact. I write all these songs and I look back on them and go, oh, these all fit together. And that's an album called Knots, and it's actually, at this point, it's got so many songs on it. I'm going to release it in 2 parts, and my goal for next year is to do part 1. I'm hoping that I'll be releasing a single from that in the spring, and maybe an acoustic EP as well, that will be some acoustic versions, stripped down acoustic versions of some of the songs from that if I have time. I feel like this EP, I feel like I've finally got the hang of doing all the production stuff. It's the first music that I've released where I am completely happy with the production. Like, there's nothing listening to this one where I'm like, I could have done better on that. There's definitely room I could improve it. There's more things I could do with it, but like, I'm happy with it. And I'm looking forward to taking that forward and making a full album-length recording. But I also have a bunch of other music projects, because with that confidence under my belt, I feel able to do things finally. Like, I have had such confidence trouble with my music over the years because my parents didn't know how to be supportive of it, could only be mean, because my bandmates kind of talked shit to me about my music and thought this solo that's playing right now they would hate. This big kind of like stad rock, smooth melodic guitar stuff, they would hate that. But this is exactly my sound. And it, all of that left me with the sense that nobody likes my music and nobody cares. And today, I've made enough money to cover next week's groceries from my music, which is basically the most successful creative project of my life so far. And I just want to make the next thing now. And I've got a few irons in the fire. At the start of this year, these weren't quite New Year's resolutions, but they were goals. It was like new original fiction, which is the first step, running on co-host at the moment as a serial, and a bunch of like made-up mech pilot posts and stuff. First step, this EP, an EP of new original music, and 3 cover songs. I currently am on 2 cover songs, so I need to do 1 more by year's end. And I have a couple of things that I'm working on. One is Bird, friend Carly. Hey, Odai, thanks for coming. One is friend Bird challenged me to do Kawaii Kite Gomen, the this is a pro Mississippi John Hurt space, Odai. lost train of thought. Yeah, so Kawaii Kate Go Men. Sorry for being so cute. And the other is a much less well-known Vocaloid song by Melty Cat called Will, which I have dreamed of covering for a long time, and I think I'm finally in a place where I can pull that off. So I'm going to get one of those done this year, and the other done early in the new year. I'm not sure which order will happen. And I guess that's kind of it. It kind of brings me up to speed. I don't know if you can tell, my throat is really starting to be stripped. So I'm going to pop the plug in chat again. There we go. I don't know exactly when I'm streaming next. I think I had an idea for something to stream tomorrow, but I can't remember what it was. So it's probably going to be Monday, because tomorrow I'm probably going to be a zombie. Yeah, that... I think that kind of security theatre stuff really kind of took off a little bit after I was at sixth form age. I was aware of it starting to feature in news stories and stuff, and it's fucking terrible. And it's looking in completely the wrong places. Because the real problem's always the fucking rich kids. But yeah, so I'm definitely back on Monday. There's a demo in the Steam Next Fest that I want to play. I'm going to stream it and see how that goes. Might do something tomorrow, depending on energy levels. But also, I might spend tomorrow just zombified in front of a bunch of YouTube videos that I'm catching up on about American football and VTubers and stuff. But let's see. Is there anyone live that we could raid into? Maybe I don't want to raid from this stream, actually. Maybe I'll just wrap it up. I want to say thank you all for coming. Please do consider, if you haven't already, checking out the EP, buying it, helping me afford food next week. I'm not going to struggle to afford food, but it just feels nice to be able to pay for it from like money I've earned from my creative projects. Yeah, good night. Please enjoy the music if you give it a listen. And may those who oppress you learn shame.